the small exception of Edward Heath, although even he, in getting the European Union legislation on the statute, made it quite clear that he was not aiming for the European as a federal state, that we all knew he really was. But he's the only Prime Minister who has ever had a federal aspiration. Though sometimes I don't know whether Tony Blair was aware of how federal some of the policies which he temporarily seemed to support. But nevertheless, all the other Prime Ministers have been quite open with the British public and accepted that there were going to have to be limits, that we were never going to go along with those who wanted total union. Now we're told by wise people around the United Kingdom that this issue has now been settled in Britain's favour. Well, I mean, which leg do you want me to pull? I mean, the honest reality is that for perfectly, as I say, understandable reasons, those people who want this will go on arguing for it, and go on manoeuvring for it, and go on fighting for it. And that's why, when we now look at the Treaty of Lisbon, as some people want to call it, probably will be called, if it gets ratified, as it probably will, we face two innovations which were extremely important. And this was why Jack Straw argued there should be a referendum for his Foreign Secretary. The introduction of a new office, the President of the European Union, instead of it being held by the head of state, which came from the country which is the presidency, and the European Foreign Minister. Now, it is, in my view, wrong to have an outsider, not a head of the government, somebody who has no moorings in democratic life any longer, such as Tony Blair, to be the President of the European Council. It is a misconception. Now, they have been only able to persuade people to go this far because the previous system was obviously unworkable. 6-month presidency was ridiculous, and we all knew it was ridiculous. And it was also difficult for countries like the United States and other countries around the world to take the European Union representation seriously when they only met the president for 6 months, and sometimes from a very small country, without the full diplomatic backup, which was no fault of their own. It was just purely and simply a reflection of their size. And you're seeing now with Slovenia that problem has been overcome by the very sensible policy which has gradually developed in Europe over the last 7 or 8 years, probably even a longer history than that, which is a grouping of countries into the presidency. So we have groupings of 3. The way to solve the problem of the European President of the European Council was to make the country, the largest country in any particular grouping, and you would so arrange the groupings that it was the 6 largest countries, in my view, and on a 3 or 4 nation grouping, that country which was the largest would provide the president for the 18-month or 24 months of their presidency. And you would then have got around this problem of not having a long enough presidency. You would have kept the link with the member states. You would have kept the link that the chairman of the European Council was a fellow head of government. You would have had the democratic legitimacy stemming from them being an elected head of government, and you wouldn't have gone for this quite ludicrous idea, which was proposed by Tony Blair and well understood by the diplomats when he proposed it, to be his next job. Now, I'm not saying that he will be his next job, but we know that Mr. Sarkozy, President Sarkozy, who seems to want it to happen, who knows, quite possibly will happen. Now, I'm not here to argue about the merits of Tony Blair or not as that candidate. I'm against that role being held by anybody who is not democratically elected head of state inside the European Union. And that is a profound constitutional change. But what really worries me, and where again I think we have to set limits, in that treaty there is the language of the treaty, which is exactly the same in this particular regard of the President of the European Union. There is a difference of agreement in the legal interpretation of those words between the Dutch government and the British government. Now, the Dutch have a very long tradition of international law, so it's no use dismissing their legal view. It is well founded, and it may or may not be correct. The British government aren't slouches on international law either, and they hold a different view. And they say it's impossible to, in the phrase, double hat the President of the European Council with the President of the Commission. But the fact that there is a legal disagreement on this ought to be a profound warning. I've written to Tony Blair, I don't know how many letters on this issue. I've discussed it with him over a 4-year period. And at no time would he, A, take it seriously enough to change the word, or to understand that it is a profound change. I mean, you don't have to, that is a limit which you have to have. Were you to merge the two roles of the new President of the European Council with the President of the Commission, de facto they would have the role and the powers of head of state. And that is exactly what serious people like D'Amato in Italy want. That it isn't an accident that the wording is opaque. They know they can't get through wording which says that you merge, but they are determined to hold open the opportunity of merging. Now, why is this important? Because this is exactly what they've done with the role of the external commissioner and the role of the High Representative for Foreign Affairs. Now, I'm a total supporter of the creation of the role of High Representative. I think Xavier Solana has been a quite exceptionally good High Representative. And I think it was necessary to have somebody because of the problem of the European Union, diversity in size and scale of its membership. When I was the European Union's co-chairman of the International Conference and representative on the former Yugoslavia, I was effectively made again de facto member of the Council of Foreign Ministers. And I was very conscious when I went to those debates that there were 5 or 6 countries which were fully informed of every aspect of what's happening in Bosnia or Croatia or Kosovo, Serbia or Slovenia or Macedonia or Montenegro. But there were a number of other foreign ministers in smaller countries that were completely out to lunch on this whole thing. They just couldn't get the complexities of it, and it was no fault of theirs. They had other priorities. They had much smaller foreign offices, and therefore part of my role was to brief them. And we had a very good system of telegrams, and I would send them telegrams after more or less every late night negotiation. And I knew perfectly well that it was not really very important for this to be read by the Foreign Secretary of Britain or the French Foreign Minister. They were aware of all this. But if you were a country newly coming into the community, like, say, Sweden, Finland, it was extremely important. And now, in the case of countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, they do need the backup and the briefing and the knowledge base that comes from the High Representative. So I'm in favour of the High Representative. Now, in logic, there is also a case for merging the external commissioner. It is a difficult thing to do. And we've come around it by making the High Representative the Vice President of the Commission and a member of the Commission. But be under no illusion, it's a